Good evening. This is literary text code number 313. We will be doing English literary text together through the next 7 lessons. Genres of literature أو الأنواع الأدبية are many, but we will be studying 3 of these genres. In this course, we will be reading texts that belong to 3 different genres. The first is poetry, the second is fiction, short stories and novels, and the third is drama. This is something that you all know, and the differences between the 3 genres are in their form and in the way they are written and in the way they are read by readers. Each of these genres has its distinctive characteristics, and as critical readers we will be looking at elements that we could use in analyzing these texts. We will start today with poetry. We have 2 poems to read. Today we will read one of them, which is called Time Does Not Bring Relief by Edna St. Vincent Millay. I will read the poem first, and then I will discuss with you some of the points that we can use in analyzing this poem, and then we will read it one more time together in detail. Time does not bring relief. You all have lied. Who told me time would ease me of my pain? I miss him in the weeping of the rain. I want him at the shrinking of the tide. The old snows melt from every mountainside, and last year's leaves are smoke in every lane. But last year's bitter loving must remain, heaped on my heart, and my old thoughts abide. There are 100 places where I fear to go, so with his memory they brim, and entering with relief some quiet place where never fell his foot or shone his face, I say, there's no memory of him here, and so stand stricken, so remembering him. This is a poem about a woman who is unable to forget the man she loved, who has either died or has left her. She tells us about her feelings and about the impossibility of forgetting her grief over this loss. In discussing this poem, of course, as we read it for the first time, we have a feeling, we have a general feeling of the sadness of this woman. But if we want to discuss it further, we have to think of some elements that we usually use in discussing poetry, and some critical terms that we use in writing about poetry. The most important aspect or element in discussing poetry is its music. And we have 2 main elements in that, the rhyme and the rhythm. Rhyme is identical sounds at the end of each line. In Arabic, al-qafiyah. And rhythm is the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in each line, أي الوزن. English rhythm is done through the stress and unstress. We can either have 2 stressed syllables and then unstressed, or the general the most common rhythm in English language is the stress and stress, stress and stress. Now, the parts of a poem, the words that we should know, a poem is divided into lines and stanzas. A line is بيت شعر, and a stanza is مقطع. So a certain number of lines would make up a stanza, and a poem could be made up of one or more than one stanza. The poem that we have done today is called a sonnet. A sonnet is a special kind of poem which is divided into 14 lines. It's what we call subgenres. We could have longer poems, we have lyrical poems, we have dramatic poems, narrative poems, all sorts of poems, and this one is called a sonnet. And the word sonnet comes from the Italian word sonetto, meaning a little song. The sonnet is a 14-line poem which follows a strict rhythm and rhyme scheme. And this is also important. It's not every 14-line poem is called a sonnet. A sonnet has a definite, a specific rhyme and a specific rhythm. And it differs because it has two forms. We have what we call the English sonnet or the Italian sonnet. Sometimes we call them the Petrarchan sonnet and the Shakespearean sonnet. Petrarchan, which goes back to Petrarch, the Italian poet. In a Petrarchan sonnet, the poem is divided into two stanzas, an octave and a sestet. The octave means a stanza, is a word that we use to call a stanza of 8 lines, while the sestet is a stanza of 6 lines. And a Petrarchan sonnet is divided into an octave and a sestet. 8 lines followed by 6 lines. The form was first brought to England by Sir Thomas White, who translated Petrarch into English. And it has a strict rhyme scheme of A, B, B, A, and A, B, B, A, C, D, E, C, D, E, or the sestet could be C, D, C, D, C, D. And these letters refer to a sound. So if the and we of course decide the rhyme according to the sound and not to the spelling. So if I have C and B, these are two sounds that rhyme together, and these would be called, for example, I'll give them the letter A. So C would be called A, and then if I have another sound, and that's a letter B, and when I have the word B again, I have the letter A once more, and then stand, for example, would be rhyming with and that would get the letter B. So what I do is that I name each new sound, I give it a letter, and whenever it recurs, I write this letter again. So in the Petrarchan sonnet, the first 4 lines will have the first and the fourth line rhyming together, and the second and the third line rhyming together. And then this same pattern will occur again in the next 4 lines. The division of the Petrarchan sonnet is not just in the rhyme. but you also have some sort of turn or a shift in direction between the octave and the sestet. That is, between the first 8 lines and the second 8 lines, the first and the second 6 lines. The first and the second stanzas are, you feel some kind of shift in them. Perhaps the first is an introduction, the second is some sort of an answer, the first is a question and the second is an answer, or an argument and its counter argument, and so on. This is usually not the case in the Shakespearean sonnet. The Shakespearean sonnet, on the other hand, consists of 3 quatrains and a couplet. A quatrain means رباعية, so it's a stanza of poetry that consists of 4 lines. And a Shakespearean sonnet is divided, its 14 lines are divided into 3 quatrains and a couplet. A couplet is a stanza made up of only 2 lines. Like the Petrarchan sonnet, it has a very strict rhyme scheme, but it's a different rhyme scheme from the Petrarchan sonnet. It follows a strict rhyme scheme of AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, and then the couplet rhymes together in GG. The couplet is an important part of the sonnet, where there is some sort of conclusion, refutation, or a surprise. In our course, we will be studying 1 Petrarchan sonnet and 1 Shakespearean sonnet. And we will start with the Petrarchan sonnet, which is the sonnet I have just read with you. Time does not bring relief. As we said, music is perhaps the most important aspect in poetry, but we also have to know some terms and vocabulary relating to the use of imagery, الصور البلاغية. And imagery is usually divided into 2 main kinds, either comparisons or sensory images. Sensory meaning تتعلق بالحواس الخمسة. And the first kind is comparisons, تشبيهات, when I compare something to something else. We can do this in details, but you have to understand that we have 2 major fields of imagery, those that fall under comparisons and those that fall under sensory images. In comparisons, usually have comparisons are divided mainly into 3 main groups. We have others, many others, but the most important comparisons in imagery are the simile, the metaphor, and the personification. There are a greater number of other figures of speech that come under comparisons, but we will limit ourselves today to simile, metaphor, and personification. First, simile. A simile is a comparison between 2 different things using the words as or like. So, for example, I can say the girl is like a rose. Here I am comparing a girl to a rose. I'm comparing these 2 things because I think that both are beautiful, or both have a red color. The girl has red cheeks, for example, or something like that. And so when I'm analyzing a simile, I usually look at what is compared to what and why. So here the girl is compared to a rose, and the common thing is their beauty. What is the common thing between both girl and rose? It is the fact that both are beautiful. Perhaps you want to say that both smell good. Maybe this is the comparison. Again, these are things that will be left to a reader, but probably a writer comparing a girl to a rose is referring to beauty, but he could be referring to other things, and readers always come up with things that perhaps never came to the writer's mind. So this is the simile, and the distinctive feature of a simile is the use of as and like. A metaphor is also comparing two things together, but we don't need to use the words as or like. It's the comparison between two things without using the words as or like. The thing compared to could be implied or stated directly. That is, I can say the girl is a rose, and in this case I would be using a metaphor, but I could also say something totally different without mentioning the thing I'm comparing it to. Like the example we have here, the man roared. To roar is a verb meaning yaz'ar. So the man roared actually compares a man to a lion. The word lion does not exist in this sentence, neither do words like as or like, but the comparison is there because I have used the verb roar with the man. So the man roared is a metaphor comparing a man to a lion, and then just like a simile I will have to think why. What is common between a man and a lion? Here perhaps it is anger or the loud voice of the man. Maybe when I say roared, I mean that his voice was very loud. So this is the common thing. A metaphor, therefore, does not need to have both elements of comparison stated directly, but of course they have to be implied. The third figure of speech or kind of comparison imagery is personification, and personification is the kind of image where an object or an animal or an idea act as if it is a human being. I'll give you an example. The sun was smiling this morning. When I say the sun was smiling this morning, I'm pretending that the sun is a person, and it has a face, it's round like a face, and when it shines, it is smiling. So it is acting like a human being. Or I can say the sea told me its secrets. Again, I'm comparing the sea to a person, to a friend who is telling me secrets and who is confiding in me. These are the three kinds of figures of speech that we will be doing for the time being, and then we will move to sensory images. The sensory images are صور الوصف الحسي. الصور التي تتناول الحواس الخمسة، سواء كان البصر أو السمع أو اللمس أو الشم. So sensory images are divided into visual imagery, auditory imagery, olfactory imagery, tactile imagery, and gustatory imagery. To start with visual imagery, visual imagery are imagery of sight, whatever I see. So when a poet is describing something that he or she wants us to visualize, to see in our minds, we call this a visual image. For example, if a writer is describing the endless crowds of people filling every spot in the street. Now, all these words are meant to bring into your mind this image of a street full of people where no one spot is empty. So this is what we call a visual image. Whenever a writer is describing something, trying to bring to your mind an image that you can see. Oral imagery or auditory imagery are imagery of sound. So a writer uses words in order to bring to your mind the sound, to remind you of the sound of something that you probably know. You will try to use words in order to make you listen to that sound while you are reading. So, for example, I could say the tweeting of birds in the early morning, and hopefully when I say this, you can reproduce in your mind the sound of tweeting birds in the morning. The click-clack of a lady's high heels coming up the stairs. Again, I say this, and what should come into your mind is tack, tack, tack of the heels of the lady coming up the stairs. So all these, we call them either oral or auditory images, that is describing a sound and trying to make the reader listen to that sound while she is reading. Olfactory imagery is imagery of smell. Again, if a writer is describing in details the smell of something, we call that an olfactory imagery. So a writer could be speaking, for example, about the smell of spilled coffee, or the smell of the sea 2 kilometers before reaching it. And then he can start giving you more details about that smell. And if the writing is good, then perhaps you will feel as if you are actually smelling that smell, or at least you remember it in your mind. You are reminded of how coffee smells or how the sea smells. And finally, we have tactile imagery, or the imagery of touch. A writer could try to bring to our mind the feeling of how something feels in terms of touch. A writer could describe, for example, bare feet on a hot sidewalk, and a description like this would bring to your mind the feeling of bare feet on a hot sidewalk, or the feeling of the smooth silk dress on her body. Again, this feeling of silk. So you are reminded in your mind, if not actually on your body, of these feelings. Gustatory imagery are the imagery of taste. And again, a writer can go on and on about how something tastes. For example, the taste of burnt meat, the sweet taste of a candy. And these could be combined with some sort of comparisons. And in the poem that we've just read, we speak about the bitterness of love. Bitter is a taste, but she is both referring to a taste and to comparison. Now, if we try to use all these literary terms and vocabulary that we've dealt with in order to read again the poem of today and to try to understand it line by line. Time does not bring relief. You all have lied. Who told me time would ease me of my pain? Usually when we read a poem, the first thing we do is that we think, who is speaking to us? Is the poet speaking in his or her own name, or is there a character speaking to us? Are these lines supposed to be said by someone in particular, or actually something, because some poems are written trying to give voice to a stone or a tree or something like that. So yes, the first question we ask ourselves when we're reading is, who is speaking to us? And I think this is quite direct. Time does not bring relief. You all have lied. Who told me time would ease me of my pain? We can clearly hear the sound or the voice of the poet telling us something about her own feelings. Now, when a poet speaks about his or her own feelings, we call that a lyrical voice. In Arabic, we call it غنائي. Lyrical meaning somebody speaking about himself or herself and describing or reflecting on their own emotions. The first two lines speak about the poet's feelings and also address everybody who believes in this saying that time is a healing element. Okay, so time does not bring relief. You all have lied. Who told me time would ease me of my pain? So this is a person who does not feel that time is capable of making her forget her pain or get over it. I miss him in the weeping of the rain. I want him at the shrinking of the tide. We know now what is it that this poet is trying to get over, what kind of pain. The pain is the pain of loss. She has lost the man she loves. We are not told whether she lost him because he left her or because he's dead, but we know he's gone, and she is describing this pain that she has. I miss him in the weeping of the rain, and I want him at the shrinking of the tide. She is describing her feelings here using both comparisons and sensory images. If you look at the weeping of the rain, she is comparing the sky to somebody who is weeping to weep is to cry, ينتحب. So the rain is weeping sadly, just like the poet is, while the tide is shrinking. The tide is shrinking. It's a low tide. So you have the image of the waves going back, receding, and you have also the image of water, of the rain. And in both imagery, you have this strong feeling of sadness, in addition to, of course, the weeping, and you have the of verbs of misery, if you like, missing and wanting somebody. I miss him in the weeping of the rain. I want him in the shrinking of the tide. The old snows melt from every mountain side, and last year's leaves are smoke in every lane. Again, we have more sensory images. You have a clear visual image of the changing season. Old snows melt from every mountain side. So there is winter where there was snow, and now winter is also going, and the snows are melting, and you have a clear visual image of snows melting on the sides of mountains. And last year's leaves are smoke in every lane. A lane is a small street, and the leaves are being burnt, either because they have fallen and they have become ashes because they are dead, or they are being gathered and actually burnt. So last year's leaves are smoke in every lane is another visual image of these yellow and yellow leaves that are turning into smoke. In this case, we can speak about both visual image as well as an olfactory imagery, because you can smell the smoke. The old snows melt from every mountain side, and last year's leaves are smoke in every lane. Now, these four lines put together, four lines put together and four imagery put together, what meaning do they give us? If we can read them again. I miss him in the weeping of the rain. I want him in the shrinking of the tide. The old snows melt from every mountain side, and last year's leaves are smoke in every lane. Now, these four images are images of changing seasons and changing weather. They give an impression of the passing of time, which is what the poem started with. So they are not just visual olfactory imagery or comparisons, but they are all images of time. This time passes and the love stays. And this is what she says in the next two lines. But last year's bitter loving must remain heaped on my heart, and my old thoughts abide. She here is a comparison between all this changing time. Time is passing. The winter is giving way to autumn and giving way to summer, and the rain stops and you have snow, and the tides are shrinking and are coming, and still with all this change in time and in the different seasons, the love does not change. Last year's bitter loving must remain. And of course she adds this idea of bitter because once the love is gone, there's no happiness about it, only bitterness stays. Heaped on my heart and my old thoughts abide. To abide is to stay, and heaped means to be put one on top of another. يتكوم. So all the words of sadness are there. You have bitter, you have heaped, and the old thoughts. So unlike the seasons, the rain and the tides, she is unchanging, and her sadness is unchanging, contradicting the idea that was put at the beginning that time changes and makes you feel better. This line ends the octave, and which is, as we said, the 8 lines, the stanza made up of 8 lines, which is the first stanza of the Petrarchan sonnet. After these 8 lines, you have another stanza, and it changes the topic slightly, and we will see how. There are 100 places where I fear to go, so with his memory they brim. Brim is both a verb and a noun, and to brim means to fill up till the end, and something that is full to the brim means full till its utmost top. So there are 100 places where I fear to go, she says, so with his memory they brim. She expresses her desire not to go to any place that has a memory of this lover, so that perhaps she can fulfill this task of forgetting him. If time is unable to heal her and make her forget her love, perhaps a change of place can. And this is where we get the shift. If the first 8 lines were about the change of time, the passing of time does not get you to forget, so perhaps the change of place can get you to forget. This is what she thinks of, and this is what she tries in this stanza. So there are 100 places where I fear to go, so with his memory they brim. And entering with relief some quiet place, where never fell his foot or shone his face, I say there's no memory of him here. She provides herself with a solution. If time is not healing, she is going to change the places in order to heal herself. And she enters with relief, happily, some quiet place where never fell his foot or shone his face. A face that shines is a face that is compared to the sun, and here you can speak of a metaphor that expresses much love towards that person that she is trying to escape from. So she's going to that place where never fell his foot or shone his face. I say there is no memory of him here. And the first idea that comes to her mind when she enters a place, that this is a place that he never came to. But by deciding that places are either places that he came to or places that he did not come to, she remembers him, and so stands stricken, so remembering him. So she is reminded of him. So the poem actually ends with what we call an irony, مفارقة, where she is trying not to remember him by going to places where he never went, but because it is inside her, this love is inside her, and everything is judged by whether he was here or he was not here. So she remembers him, whether she goes to a place they went to together or a place that he has never been. And so the poem ends with this irony of failing to forget. She has blamed people because they told her that time will make her forget, and she gives all the reasons how time does not make you forget, and in the sense that she tries to forget through the change of place, but again fails. So neither what people told her to do succeeded in making her forget, nor what she suggested to herself was a success. I will leave you now with a graphic design of this poem and hope you can enjoy it, and now that you have understood it, because after all, literature is there for you to enjoy more than anything. Thank you.